We made it to the end. I just wanted to first thank all of the organizers of the Swanee Writers Conference for doing such a great job. This is the first time that I've been in a literary space that actually resembles America, and so it's just been really lovely. All right, so I'm going to read a couple of new poems, and then I'm going to read from Trouble Sleeping. Metaphor. I like to think of my body as a house, cellular walls covered in red, the eyeball windows into another dimension. I was born into a body not of my choosing, always too something, too pale, too fragile, poor eyesight, given to illness, a poor constitution. There are cracks in this house's foundation. Weeds and wildflower seep into the basement. During rain season, the basement floods. The water climbs the stairs. One day, I fear the water will reach the attic, where I'll be, holding my breath, preparing. And this is called This Tiny Utopia Nestled in the Archive. What I remember most are the lawns, lines the mowers made on the deepest greenery, the sparse trees that lined the neighborhood. Remember the peach tree in the backyard? The modest, semi-detached homes filled with people that looked, spoke, and drove Buicks like us. The airplanes that flew over our roof daily on their way to LaGuardia Airport. The green and white lawn chairs that made tic-tac-toe boxes on your legs, and me counting the clouds, which I mistook for fat-ass sheep. The extravagant Sunday church hats that moved like ceiling fans, the holiday parties and the basement parties, the slow drag, the red bulbs replacing the white, and in general, feeling like a silhouette peeling from yourself, stuck in the background, wanting to move center on the dance floor. Watch me get down. Thank you. So it's hard for me to tell you what Trouble Sleeping is about, but I'm hoping that by sharing some of these poems, you can draw your own conclusions and hopefully discover it for yourself. But I want to begin with this poem. I grew up in New York City, and my memory of New York is really going to the movies a lot. And one of the movie theaters that I would go to was at World Trade Center. So you can imagine the loss. Amistad. My father and I run into each other at the edge of Lower Manhattan, World Trade Center, where there's a movie house. We tiptoe down the slope, making our way to our seats. We don't exchange pleasantries. Cinque, stolen from his native land. A body of water separates Cinque from his home. We have front row seats inside the belly of the ship. History so close it hums. The rush of water now spilling in my lap. I close my eyes, blink, water breaking through the screen, water rising from the floor, how the past revolts against the present. I lift both feet. We're in this together, our own Amistad, headed somewhere, a meeting place, captive. So I went to Howard University, and I don't know about your college experience, but learning how to swim was required in the College of Arts and Science. And so you can imagine how many people transferred out of the College of Arts and Science because Black folks, we have this history with water. So the title of this poem is, and this is a direct quote, our swim instructor says, Black folks have a fear of water going back generations. And so we all sucked our teeth and rolled our eyes when he said this. Hands fold in prayer formation over our heads, our bodies arrows when a voice yells, trust the water, get on your back, you'll float. Each backstroke is a struggle to imagine something else. Not bodies cutting the sea. I want to reach the floor, slice its velvet blue at the speed of light. The water dark where a row of bones lay quiet. I'm back in the womb, searching for an opening. All right, let's see how we're doing on time. I really wish I was a playwright. You guys are the coolest. Can we give the playwrights a hand? Like, oh my God. Sheesh. So cool for school. All right, this is called In 1984. Shout out to all my fellow 80s babies. Yeah? In 1984, a new nation def jammed. Jerry curls dripping all over suede jumpsuits, hanging gold medallions, radios slung over tattooed shoulders, new sounds clashing at different velocities. Thriller, Rockbox, Roxanne, The Freaks Come Out at Night, urban word slingers, leather jackets, all the way vinyl. The hysteria, was it rock? Definitely hip, pop too. The movie houses showed Gremlins, Terminators, Something Strange in the Neighborhood. Who you gonna call? That was the year Jesse Jackson ran for president and Reagan won. The year Apple unveiled its first bubble-screened PC. The year moonwalkers, spray painters, Kangol hats remixed pop culture forever. That year, my mother sported a platinum bob. She turned 18, wore a gold tooth with a star that blinged, rocked a squirrel fur wraparound, her eyes squinted in the photograph, but looking forward, carrying me, a newborn, outside the city, above the Bronx, to Yonkers, where I absorbed everything. The rhythm of subway cars chewing through dark, lights dimming, turntables scratching, discotheques, my first step with a hip bounce, ow. I hold my breath, wait for the needle to scratch a new groove, discover the world a dance floor, splintered. Thank you. So I want to give a special shout out to my workshop leaders, Carl and Tarfia. One of the hardest parts of putting Trouble Sleeping together was that last poem that I wanted to get right. And one of my graduate professors handed me a copy of In the Blood, and it was almost as if this poem taught me how to close my book. So I feel like, yeah. So this is On Passing, or Notes Toward a Manifesto. In a dream, a young Baraka slaps 5 with my father. They ask when I last got some pussy or whooped someone's ass. On the one side of the street are the black poets, their closed memberships, spider-fingered handshakes, invitation-only parties, tossing my journal with my father. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. I'm soft-spoken. He's bullhorn. I believe in breaths. We're both sensitive. I do not deserve to be his son. I didn't suffer like my father. Don't fit in any boxes with bars. Never served time except once at Bellevue for 17 days. I retreat in ambiguity, live between the lines, prefer shadow to light. I do girl push-ups, write on the mirror with my mother's lipstick. I am nothing like my father. I spend my recesses reading When the People Could Fly, Black Skin, White Masks, and Metamorphoses. I visit Harlem with my 35 millimeter in search of jazz. I'm paranoid. My palms stay moist. Long before I wake from this dream, there's your voice and Baraka's, the broken limbs ghosting our family tree, you and Baraka mouthing to me, this life is a relay race, and in a single hand motion, catch. And that look on your faces, the pause, the lean in, the reveal. Let's see, a few more minutes. How y'all doing? All right, good. You know, I tell you, whenever you're under the spotlight, I always feel like that rotisserie chicken, you know, at the supermarket. And sometimes it's like, do I just turn around, you know, and brown, like, what's going on? This is called flashback. The tree outside my window waves to me, its limbs shadow puppets, the moon a bald cameraman. I'm 5 years old again. The night sings to me. The tree is a monster. I try to scream, but nothing. There's a wooden box in my sock drawer where a dozen used roses that I stole at your funeral are now crimson crisps. Fragile, like how I imagine you in the ground, fetal position, bud-bodied, all curlicue, one touch and crack, it's all over, your memory reduced to pieces. I hold on to my memory of your face. A 5 o'clock shadow moves in. I won't sleep or blink or yawn. You, Grandpa, were so sure about death, less so about life. You talked about the 2000s like an apocalypse was sure to arrive in a spaceship, a stolen election, another war. Your memory of yestercentury, translucent, pungent, all those banana peels, overripe, screaming to be released. At twilight hours, I pace room to room. The moon dances behind the Venetian blinds, entering in slices. The letter you mailed the day before you died, now moth yellow, rests inside my sock drawer. Inside the envelope is a photograph. Bow-legged yellow kid, a 2-inch fro, my hands spread-eagled. We must have been playing airplanes. I'm looking at the ground, never up. And I'm going to close, I'm going to close with the opening poem. How's that? How to begin a short film. Begin with a location, brick, spray paint bottles, and you have vivid block-lettered murals. Begin on the F train, hot metal pressing against metal, the screech of each stop from the edge of Queens to Lower Manhattan to Harlem, the bright orange ball, magnetism. Begin with a conductor who wishes he were a DJ, announcing each stop like he's Isaac Hayes. Begin with a shooting, a controversial art exhibit, a mob throwing dung at the Black Madonna, a Peruvian dance troupe in Washington Square Park. Begin with bearded men playing chess for a meal, coffee houses lining Bleecker Street. Begin with Donny Hathaway, and the rest is all downhill from there, my grandfather yells from behind the funny pages. Begin with Biggie and Tupac, curls falling slow deaths to the sound of scissors at Carl's barbershop. Begin with flattened time. The world, rumor had it, would end in 2000, but really a year later when those buildings broke like two legs. Begin with a location and bold green street signs and photographs by Gordon Parks of old Harlem, and soon you have an appetite for cameras stealing all those hungry faces and nameless places in a bolt of light. Next thing you know, it's Friday, and you're at your uncle's studio, his Brooklyn apartment turned dark room, sheets covering the windows. Begin somewhere you can't name. In the slurred speech of your mother after an argument, I should have aborted you. End with alcohol, antidepressants, various addictions, Billie Holiday, N with jazz solos, blue flashing lights, white smoke, zoot suits, alligator shoes, and bloodshot roses. Wisteria, his eye is on the sparrow, and life bleeding you of innocence. Begin and end with a memory. You are 15, being chased. The air is dry. You are fatigued. In the background is Miles Davis's So What? Everything fades to black. I've edited this story 30 times. Begin with a scream, broken glass, wrists strapped to a wheelchair. Begin with a train ride and end like this. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me here. It's really been an honor and such a pleasure to get to know so many folks and just to be part of this wonderful community. I'm going to read two quick things. The first of which is I'm here in nonfiction, but I also write fiction. I have a novel forthcoming sometime, and I've never read from it. In fact, this is all brand new, and it might be cut entirely by the time it comes into the world, but I figured in the spirit of embracing brand new work and the vulnerability of a lot of folks being here, I'd just read 1.5 pages from that novel, and then I'll read just a little bit from my book. The novel doesn't have a name, but it's going to be great. Okay. The community. Oh, and this little section I'm reading comes at the end of chapter 1 or so. The community in this valley, tucked just 15 winding miles from the next town, was filled with women who lived unlike any other women anyone had heard of. Together, for one thing. Unnatural, some people said. It isn't right what they do. They look ugly, some people said. Saggy-titted, no bras, letting their gray hairs run frizzy and their armpits grow big and stanky and their legs grow long, dark hair like dogs, sometimes wearing no clothes at all. Stretch marks, scars, their big bushes erupting from their crotches and growing down the insides of their thighs, the cellulite on their legs just out for anyone to notice, jiggly as the sea and cratered as the moon. Well, not everyone was like that. Some women had lean, tight bodies, buoyant breasts, a halo of perfect black hair, or cascades of auburn locks. Some women who looked like Renaissance goddesses chose to live among them too, and that was part of what nobody could figure out. Why beautiful women would live amongst the hags, how it all worked, why they chose to live there. There were some men, too, but they were more often tucked inside the houses, shy, castrated, some people heard. Others thought heroes. Still others believed because they were the roosters in a house so full of hens. But the community paid no mind to the rumors. They were happy with what they were, how they had become that way. No police station or jailhouse, no need, since the rules governing the place were self-imposed, and no criminals, none of the kind that mattered, were allowed in. Not that they could do their bad deeds here anyway. A woman could step out onto her front porch with no bra, in just some small, worn-out, who-cared dress, and have no worry that someone might see her and mistake her body to be at the behest of their pleasure. A woman could drink a neighbor's homebrew beer all day and night, cup after cup, until she was tripping over, didn't know her own name, pass out drunk on his bed in her skivvies, and wake up in the morning worried only about the hangover. She would not get infected by flashbacks of what he'd done in the night. She would not check her panties for goop. There was no wasted time wondering if something bad had happened, and so the women had time for other things: daydreaming, business plans, growing roses, playing fiddle, sleeping, smoking, a relationship with darkness and solitude that was not rooted in potential danger. A woman could rise from her sleepless bed in the darkest hour of the night, wrap herself in a sweater against the chill, walk into the forest, no flashlight, no fear. She could hear the snap of a twig and not startle. And if her nighttime walk took her climbing into the Golden Hills, all the way to the community's boundary, well, then that's when she might double back. But in her nighttime walk, She didn't need to fear bumping into a man because men didn't prowl at night, weren't allowed to wander in the darkness alone, not because of what they might do, they couldn't, but to help the new women who were still adjusting feel safe. A woman could lay her body down in the dawn fog and think of who she'd like to fuck, and then fuck her, or him, and be sure it would never be more than she wanted. And if, on those rare occasions where a man in the community said something rude, something she didn't like, she would tell him he was full of shit. She was not afraid of his anger. She did not smile at him or fake laugh at his jokes if they were not funny. There was no need to mitigate his violence and how she moved through the world, and so she just moved through it, her whole, singular, unflinching self. Okay. Thanks, all right, and now I'm going to read a part of the prologue from my book, The Electric Woman, which is a memoir about essentially running away with the circus. All right. Oh, and I feel like this is my reading copy. And one time I was staying somewhere with an anxious dog. And so, you get attached to your copy. So that's where we are. All right. The trick is there is no trick. We start by lighting ourselves on fire, parts that are easier to put out than our faces. Hands to begin. Arms outstretched, palms toward the darkening sky, I watch as a flaming torch is wiped across my hand from wrist to fingertips. For 1, maybe 2 seconds, I'm on fire. The flame trail is 2 inches high. My hand warms. It doesn't burn exactly, but it feels like touching black leather after it's baked in the sun, a heat I impulsively want to move away from. I close my fist around the flame and put myself out. What sorts of acts can you do? The sideshow manager, Tommy, asked. Before I wrote back, I Googled acts in a sideshow. I culled a list of what I saw on Wikipedia's sideshow page. Juggling, fire swallowing, poi spinning, magic. I started feeling more brazen. What couldn't I learn in a couple of months? Bed of nails, snake charming, I wrote, and then all animal charming. I'm good with animals. Terrific, Tommy wrote back. See you in 2 months. I decided to learn one of the many acts I'd claimed to know. So now I'm in an introduction to fire eating class at a fire arts collective in Oakland, California, because of course, these things exist in the Bay Area. The evening outside the fence doesn't notice me. Buses sigh, a kid across the street accuses another of a basketball foul, old women roll their groceries behind them. I'd hoped some magic was involved in learning to eat fire. Something that meant you didn't really have to do the thing that it appeared you were doing. Maybe you spread a flame retardant solution in your mouth, like on hotel curtains. Perhaps there was a little machine you wore behind your ear that shot fire-squelching foam onto the flame as it approached your face, or maybe it was an illusion. But the class is a total disappointment. There's no trick. You eat fire by eating fire. On the first day, Shayna, our teacher, all smiles, says, "Look at my severe burns." She rolls up her sleeves and points with delight to a series of scars on her arms, like she's identifying constellations for a child. The class is in a massive warehouse full of fire artists. We trudge past the welders and blacksmiths and ceramicists into an outside yard full of huge gas canisters and no smoking, dangerous, flammable signs. We light our torches. I try not to think about the waiver I signed detailing possible death and dismemberment. The first lesson, how to put yourself out. There's only one other student in the class, a video game designer with small gauges in his ears. I ask him why he's in the fire-swallowing class, and he tells me that he feels too ordinary at Burning Man as a stilt walker. He wants to be special. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit towards the end of the prologue. So we've lit lots of our body parts on fire. All right. Next, it's time for the tongue. Because he is a human with naturally developed survival instincts, Stiltwalker does not get the flame all the way to his tongue the first several tries. His tongue is as stuck as far out from his body as it can go. I can see the muscles at the base of it quivering with effort. He turns the torch toward his mouth and lowers the flame. It's a foot away, 6 inches, 4, and then moves swiftly away from his face with a flame trail like a comet. He laughs nervously, shakes out his neck, and resumes his pose, head tilted slightly back, tongue out, a lizard mid-catch. He begins lowering the flame toward his tongue again. Somehow, he's trying to back his body away from the flame at the same time that he is bringing the fire closer to his face. Again, it's 5 inches, 1 inch away, and a retreat. It's not surprising. Shayna tells us nobody puts the fire right into her mouth, right onto her tongue. There are too many years of learned behavior in the way. At the end of his turn, Stiltwalker has attempted 5 or 6 times and brought the flame very close. I'm impressed, though my stomach clenches a little each time, worried for his face. Your turn, Shayna says. I dip the torch in fuel, shake it out, and Shayna lights it. I'm sure I won't get it all the way in. She's demonstrated the movements a few times, and I replicate what she's done. Widen my legs into a triangle, arch my spine, tilt my head back 90 degrees, bring the torch up above my face a foot or so, and with a dramatic turn of the wrist, beeline it right into my mouth. I touch the torch to my tongue for 1 second and pull it back out toward the sky. Jesus Christ, Shayna says. My mouth tastes like camping. My lips tingle. You just lit your tongue on fire, she says. And this is the only time I can imagine that being a congratulatory exclamation. I bring the still-lit torch back above my head, angle my wrist, and bring it down straight into my mouth again. Wow, Shayna says, laughing. You don't have many instincts for self-preservation. I consider telling her the whole story, but then think better of it. The back of my teeth feel a little sooty on my tongue. As soon as the class is over, I can tell my mouth is burned. Shayna says this is normal. Patches of my face and arms are red and tender, and there is cracked skin, almost like little dried out blisters on the corners of my mouth. I have a blind date after my class. Looks like I have bad herpes. I avoid remembering this while I'm in the fire-eating class, but I used to be a chicken. My childhood memories are haunted by feeling too scared to do anything, from taking out the garbage at night to striking a match for incense. I watched all the other kids act brazen and bold as I stood at 8 years old, 12, 17, upset with how much I did not want to be the person that I was becoming. Later, I told people that I willed myself to stop being a fraidy cat, but I think, as these things go, we develop personality traits when we need them. For my whole life, I've been scared, terrified of losing my mom. I'm losing my mom. While I'm standing among explosive containers on a quiet Oakland night, she is humming at a nurse in one of her daily therapy sessions because she no longer has language. While I'm running a flame along my palm, she is running her hand across the half of her body that can no longer move. She touches it a lot, the paralyzed side. Perhaps it doesn't feel like it belongs to her. She touches everything around her. Kitchen table, fork, husband, we say, as she touches those things, to let her know they still belong to her, too. Wound, we say, as she touches her head, where it was opened after her brain would not stop bleeding. She's a yes person, a woman of adventure. When I begin to doubt that I can pull this off, I stop and think of her. The only way to do it is to do it. There's no trick. Thank you. And next up is Huang. Woo.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you all for your beautiful reading. I want to thank Dia, Gwen, and Adam and all the staff for taking good care of us. I'm so grateful to Claire, Neil, and everyone in my workshop. When I was here in 2018, I was the first scholar to read. This time, I'm the last fellow to read. I felt very special both times. Thank you all for being here. I'm Huang. I have 3 books. Living Treasures is my debut novel. My Old Faithful is my linked story collection. And I will read from my new book, My Good Son. This is the first in-person reading since the book was published in May. I read the opening scene. The story is set in Yangzhou, a provincial town in China, in 1990. If he could have exchanged limb for a wish, Mr. Cai would have traded his gladly in order to unleash Fan, his only son, into a life where he could live and prosper on his own. Afternoon sunshine slanted from the northwest-facing kitchen, hot and stuffy with the carb soup simmering in a slow cooker. Mrs. Cai unfolded a letter on the dining table and saw a hint of blush coming to Fan's pallid face. He was lean and willowy, like a beanpole, towering above his mother beside him. Despite the height difference, the mother and son had faces looking strikingly similar, so in a way, the chiseled nose and high cheekbones were too pretty on Fan for his own good. Now that Mr. Cai had the full attention, he read aloud a love letter, written and signed by Fan to a young cook working at the canteen of his continuation school. I can't wait for the class to end and the day to go dark so I can slide my hand under your apron to touch your dudou, the luscious satin I've ever stroked. What the hell is this? Mrs. Cai pounded the dining table so hard that his cup jumped up from his saucer. Fan shuddered and stepped back. Nothing, Dad. Mrs. Cai reached out a hand to stroke Fan's hair, but he pulled back before she could touch him. This should teach her not to pet him like a baby, Mrs. Cai could only hope. She complained about unwanted attention, and I, your old dad, was called to your school to be given this. Mrs. Cai swept the letter off the table. You tell me if this can be called a love letter. I only speak up. Fan's finger shook as he pointed to the floor. When I wrote the letter, I only want to feel her dudou. It was made from a rare silk bouquet embroidered with. On another day, Mrs. Cai might have indulged Fan, for his son had a fascination for silks and other fine fabrics, but not today. What do you take me for? Some old dimwit? Mrs. Cai ripped the reading glasses from his nose. I was a tailor before you were born. Have you ever seen me touching a woman's underwear when she tries on new clothes? Fan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Mrs. Cai rarely saw tears from his son. Fan had inner strength that belied his fragile appearance. As a young boy, he had taught himself to make rag dolls with scrap cloth. By the time Fan was in middle school, Mrs. Cai had made him quit his hobby until his grades were ranked among the top 30%. As a result, Fan had not made another rag doll, nor had he shed a tear about giving it up. Now Mrs. Cai sat at the small table where Fan usually took his meal after he failed the exam. He is really sorry, she said. Go study now, and dinner will be ready in a few minutes. Mrs. Cai was too angry to look at Fan and turned his face toward the windows. A magpie landed on windowsill to comb its tail with its beak. Even the birds choose a season to mate, lay eggs, and raise their young. Why couldn't Fan remain absent for a few more months? You may not care about your future. Mrs. Cai heard the tremor in his own voice and cleared his throat. But you're indebted to your parents, who work until their backs break in order to provide for you. Fan stomped on the letter and kneaded the paper under his soul with vengeance until the letter was torn in the middle. Mrs. Cai had never seen his son so distraught before. If Fan poured a half of his passion into studies, what might he have not achieved? So Mrs. Cai wants his son Fan to become an engineer, but Fan wants to become a tailor like his father. Fen has failed college entrance exam 4 times, and this is his last chance. Meanwhile, a young American man named Jude comes to the tailor shop to have a vest made. Mr. Cai seizes the opportunity to ask Jude to be Fen's financial sponsor so that Fen can come to study at the American University. Of course, this plan backfires. Mr. Cai discovers that Jude is a gay man and needs help to come out to his estranged father. In the next scene, Jude comes to tailor shop to try on a tonsuit robe made of silk. Mr. Cai hasn't worked with a gay customer before, so he's a little nervous. Jude is fluent in Chinese language, but he's not so well-versed in Chinese culture. Mr. Cai watched Jude button his tonsuit robe up to his chest. Bright sunlight-tinted silk fabric, a high gloss finish, and made it look almost sheer. It lent the foreigner Chinese and youthful air, so that Jude's good looks appeared ageless, raceless, and genderless. There was one problem. With the top clasp open, the collar enveloped Jude's neck like a cabbage leaf. "You can't leave the top clasp open," Mr. Cai said. "Why not?" Jude pressed a hand to his muscular chest. Perhaps his beauty lay in the androgynous features Mr. Cai only now saw for what they were. "A tonsuit robe is not worn this way." Mr. Cai stepped forward to hook Jude's top clasp. "That's much better." Jude gazed at himself in the mirror and turned from side to side. The robe swung around him like a weeping willow. "It's too loose for me." Jude peered back over his shoulder. "That's the way it's supposed to be." Mr. Cai retreated to the sofa. "Tonsuits are loose-fitting. We aren't stingy with fabric. If we want a new tonsuit robe, we use the best material available, and plenty of it." Jude unhooked his top clasp. "But robe doesn't fit me. My body is lost in all this gauze silk. Look," he pinched the sides of his robe. "I could be this big and wear it well. I'm 50 pounds short for your robe." Jude's complaint upset Mr. Cai more than he had expected. "If you know anything about a man's tonsuit robe, you won't ask for it to fit you as tightly as a woman's stockings." Jude looked taken back, even a little hurt. Mr. Cai was sorry that he had sounded unkind. A foreigner didn't know how tonsuits should fit, so he had to be patient and not mocking. Tonsuit isn't designed to show off a person's body, especially of a man. A tailor's job is to enhance a woman's beauty, but for men, less is more. A tonsuit robe fits a man when he diminishes in it and becomes one with his robe. Look, Mr. Cai pointed to the pattern on Jude's robe. The peonies and butterflies, creatures of nature, and you inside it, also a creature of nature. Only when you are immersed in the peonies and butterflies will you become one with them. Mr. Cai took a handful of Huang gauze. The silk is in ginger and turquoise, the colors of soil and sky. The peonies and butterflies are scenes of summer. As you wear them on your robe, you become a part of the summer scene, Jude. That sounds nice. Jude pulled up the robe to his knees. But do I have to be covered from neck to toe? I'm a swimmer, you know. In the summer, I'm in shape and tan well. Maybe a tonsuit robe isn't for you. Mrs. Cai helped Jude to undress. Then Fen comes home early from school. He is fascinated with Jude when he finds out that Jude is gay. He's talking to Jude in English, which annoys Mrs. Cai very much because he doesn't understand what he's saying to his face. Mrs. Cai became more and more annoyed with Fen, who insists on speaking English. He stepped between the young men and waved his hand decisively as if to sever the communication. You come to pick up the robe in a couple of days, Mr. Jude. We're very busy right now. If there's nothing else, I'd like to see you out. Fen put his hand on Mr. Cai's shoulder. Dad, Jude said the tonsuit robe is too big. Mrs. Cai stepped aside to let Fen's hand drop off. It's supposed to fit loose. Can I have a look? Fen turned to Jude and spoke to him in English. To Mrs. Hyde's disbelief, Jude lifted the rope from the hangers and slid it over Fenn's back. The young man stood side by side in front of the mirror to praise his fit. Mrs. Hyde was a little dazed by what he saw. Like Jude, Fenn appeared ageless, raceless, and genderless. The light coloring also makes it look wide. Dad, you can take it in a bit more. It's not a crime to give it a little shape. As Fenn turned aside to look at his own profile, Jude swept his eyes at Fenn from head to toe. Mrs. Hyde had heard enough. Do you want to finish this rope? He asked his son. Fenn exchanged a few words with Jude in English. He said he can use it for casual wear, like captain for a slumber party, something like that. Mrs. Hyde had never heard of a captain or slumber party. Why did Jude suddenly stop speaking Chinese to him? Were the young men talking about something they didn't want him to know? Some secret knowledge of being gay? So Mrs. Hyde overreacts when it comes to Fenn. The relationship between a parent and child is one of the few relationships in society that is not at heart transactional. One of the dangers of this intimacy is that the lack of boundaries, which could have serious consequences. Through Mrs. Hyde, I also explore wider moral questions. Do you treat people as a means or as an end? Initially, Mrs. Hyde approaches Jude strategically as someone who might help Fenn to study in the United States. Quickly, though, he becomes Jude's friend and commits to help him despite the outcome of the sponsorship. The characters surprise me with their strengths, complexity, kindness, and above all, autonomy, which is so gratifying for a writer. Thank you, and we love Swanee.